The meeting room on Kepler Station was huge and round, with seats for all the different alien species that made up the Galactic Council. Jake Morrison sat in the human section, his fingers drumming quietly on the metal table. He had been coming to these meetings for 5 years now, and every time felt the same. The aliens would talk and talk, but nothing ever got done. To him, Dr. Lisa Grant flipped through her tablet, showing pictures of the refugee camps on the mining planets. Millions of people were living in terrible conditions, waiting for help that never came. The council had been discussing this problem for 8 months now, and still nothing had happened. The situation in the Outer Rim requires careful study, said the Zephyrian ambassador, his blue skin shimmering under the station lights. We cannot rush into action without proper consideration. Jake had heard these same words so many times before. Always the same excuses, always the same delays. He looked around the room at the other species representatives. The Kithrans with their thick scales and cold eyes. The Telosians with their tall, thin bodies and proud expressions. The Arcturians with their large heads and gentle faces. All of them nodding along, pretending to care. Ambassador Morrison, called out the council. Speaker, a massive creature from the hegemony with 6 arms and a voice like grinding stone. Does humanity have anything to add to this discussion? Jake stood up slowly. This was his chance to speak like always. For 300 years, humans had been the ones pushing for action in the council. They were the ones who wrote the proposals, who organized the aid missions, who tried to make the galaxy a better place. And for 300 years, the other species had listened politely and then done nothing. We have a proposal, Jake said, his voice carrying across the silent chamber. The refugees need immediate help. Food, medical supplies, and temporary housing. We can have relief ships ready to launch within 72 hours. The Kithran representative, a scarred warrior named Vex, let out a sound that was almost like laughter. The humans and their emergency responses, he said, his voice full of mockery. Always so eager to act without thinking. Several other aliens made sounds of agreement. The Zephyrian ambassador nodded his blue head. Perhaps we should form a committee to study the humans' proposal. We could have recommendations ready in 6 months. 6 months? Lisa Grant spoke up from her seat, her voice sharp with anger. People are dying right now. Children are starving. We don't have 6 months. The good doctor shows the typical human emotion, said the Telosian representative, her voice smooth and condescending. This is precisely why we must take time to think clearly. Jake felt something cold settle in his chest. Not anger, exactly, but something deeper. He had given his whole career to this council, believing that if humans just kept trying, kept talking, kept pushing for what was right eventually, the other species would listen. But they never did. They just used humans as their conscience, their voice of moral authority, while they did whatever they wanted. You know what your problem is? Vex the Kithran said, looking directly at Jake. You humans think you can solve everything with your endless talking. But talk is cheap. Action requires strength, and you have shown that you prefer words to deeds. The chamber erupted in what passed for laughter among the different species. Some clicked their tongues, others made whistling sounds, and a few just rumbled deep in their throats, but they were all laughing at the same thing. At humanity. At their endless attempts to make the galaxy better. Jake looked around the room at all these creatures, who had grown comfortable with human persistence. They knew that, no matter how many times they dismissed a human proposal, there would always be another one next week. They knew that humans would keep coming back, keep trying, keep believing that things could change. You're right, Jake said quietly, and the laughter stopped. We do talk too much. He reached for his tablet and his papers, gathering them into a neat pile. Lisa looked at him with confusion, but she started packing her things too. The other human representatives around the table began to stand up, following Jake's lead. Where are you going? Asked the council speaker, his 6 arms spreading wide in what might have been surprise. We haven't finished the session. Jake walked toward the exit, not looking back at the alien faces that were now watching him with something like concern. For the first time in 3 centuries, a human delegation was leaving a council meeting without making their usual speech about cooperation and understanding. "Ambassador Morrison," called out the Zephyrian, his voice losing its earlier smugness. "Surely you don't intend to abandon the democratic process?" Jake stopped at the door, his hand on the control panel. Behind him, the entire human delegation had formed a line, ready to leave. He turned around one last time to look at the council chamber, at all the species that had taken human patience for granted. "We're done talking," he said simply. "Good luck with your committees." The door slid shut behind them with a soft hiss. In the corridor outside, the human delegation walked in silence toward their ship. Nobody spoke about what had just happened, but they all understood. Something had changed in that room. Something had broken that could never be fixed. Back in the chamber, the aliens sat in stunned silence. For the first time in centuries, they had no idea what the humans would do next. They had grown so used to human predictability that they had forgotten humans could surprise them. The council speaker's voice rumbled through the quiet room. "Perhaps we should postpone the session?" But it was too late for that. The humans were already gone and they were not coming back. 3 weeks had passed since the humans walked out of the council meeting. At first, the aliens thought it was just another human protest. They expected the humans to come back in a few days, ready to make speeches about cooperation and understanding. But the humans never came back. Admiral Helen Cross stood on the bridge of the human warship Defiant, watching the last human research station pack up its equipment. The station had been studying alien plant life for 15 years, working together with scientists from 6 different species. Now the humans were taking everything and leaving. "Ma'am, the Arcturian scientists are asking if they can keep some of the research data," said Lieutenant Commander Ryan Torres from his station. "They say they need it to continue their work." Helen shook her head. "Tell them no. All human research goes with us. If they want to study plants, they can do it themselves." Down on the station, Dr. Amy Peterson was personally destroying the most sensitive research files. She had spent 8 years working with the Arcturians, teaching them about human medical techniques. They were good people, kind and gentle, but they had never spoken up in the council when the humans were being mocked. "Dr. Peterson," said her Arcturian colleague, Dr. Zim, his large eyes full of confusion. "Why are you doing this? We have always been friends." Amy looked up from her computer screen, where she was deleting years of shared research. "You were my friend, Zim, but your government wasn't. When the council laughed at us, where was Arcturus? Silent, like always." "But this research could help millions of people across the galaxy," Zim pleaded. "You cannot just destroy it." "Watch me," Amy said, and pressed the delete key. All across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out. Human traders were closing their shops and leaving alien worlds. Human diplomats were packing their bags and heading home. Human teachers were walking out of schools where they had been teaching alien children for decades. On Earth, President Nathan Blake stood before Congress, explaining what was happening. "For 300 years, we have been the galaxy's conscience," he said. "We wrote the laws that kept peace between species. We built the systems that allowed them to trade with each other. We created the translation programs that let them talk to each other. And what did we get in return? Mockery and dismissal." The Congress chamber was packed with representatives from every human world. They had all seen the video of the council meeting, where the aliens had laughed at human proposals to help the refugees. They had all watched their diplomats walk out in disgust. "Some of you will say we should try again," Blake continued, "that we should go back and keep talking. But I ask you this, why should we beg for respect from people who will never give it?" The answer came in thunderous applause. The humans had made their decision. Meanwhile, the effects of human withdrawal were starting to show. The great trade routes that connected the galaxy had been organized by human logistics experts. Without them, ships were getting lost, deliveries were being delayed, and some worlds were running out of basic supplies. Captain Vera, Strongwind of the Telosium flagship, Harmony was trying to coordinate a relief mission to the Outer Rim refugees. But without human translators, half her crew couldn't understand the orders. The translation programs were failing, showing error messages in languages nobody could read. "Get me the human embassy," she told her communications officer. "There is no human embassy anymore, Captain," the officer replied. "They closed it yesterday. All human staff have returned to their homeworlds." Vera stared at the empty space where the human embassy had been on her screen. For the first time, she began to understand what was happening. The humans weren't just protesting, they were leaving. All of them, forever, on the mining worlds where the refugees were suffering. The situation was getting worse. The human relief ships that had been bringing food and medicine had stopped coming. The aliens had expected someone else to take over, but nobody did. The other species were too busy arguing about who should pay for the supplies. Dr. Lisa Grant, who had been working with the refugees for 2 years, was on the last human medical ship to leave the area. She watched through the window as the refugee camps grew smaller in the distance. There were still millions of people down there who needed help, but the humans had tried to help them and been ignored. "It's not fair to them," said her assistant, Nurse Betty Collins, looking at the camps below. "No, it's not," Lisa agreed. "But it's not our job to save people who won't let us." Back on Kepler Station, the Galactic Council was meeting again, but the chamber felt empty without the human delegation. The seat where Jake Morrison used to sit was covered with dust. The other species were trying to discuss the refugee crisis, but without human proposals to guide them, they didn't know what to do. "Perhaps we should contact Earth directly," suggested the Zephyrian ambassador. "Explain that this was all a misunderstanding." "And say what?" asked Vex the Kithran. "That we're sorry for laughing at them? That we need them after all?" The chamber fell silent. Nobody wanted to admit that they had been wrong about the humans. They had thought human patience was weakness, but now they were learning it had been strength. The humans had been holding the galaxy together with their endless efforts to make things work. Ambassador Quill of the Telosian Federation stood up. "Slowly, I think," he said quietly, "we may have made a terrible mistake, but it was too late for regrets. The humans were already gone, and they showed no signs of coming back. The galaxy was about to learn what it was like to function without the species that had been its heart for 3 centuries. The great human experiment in galactic cooperation was over. Now it was time for the galaxy to see if it could survive without them." 6 months had passed since the last human ship left galactic space. The galaxy was falling apart. Wars that had been quiet for hundreds of years were starting again. Trade routes that had worked smoothly for decades were breaking down. Species that had been allies were now enemies. Captain Vera Strongwind stood on the bridge of her ship, watching the battle outside. Kithran warships were fighting Zephyrian fighters near the border between their territories. The fighting had been going on for 3 weeks now, and thousands of soldiers were dead on both sides. "Captain, we're getting reports of fighting in the Arcturus sector too," said her communications officer. "The hegemony has attacked 2 research stations." Vera closed her eyes. "When the humans were here, they would have already organized peace talks. They would have brought the fighting species together and made them work out their problems with words instead of weapons. But the humans were gone, and nobody else knew how to stop the violence." "Any word from the council?" she asked. "They've been meeting for 6 days straight," the officer replied. "But every time they try to agree on something, the translation system crashes. Half the species can't understand what the other half is saying." The translation systems had been built by human programmers over 200 years ago. They were complex and delicate, requiring constant updates and maintenance. When the humans left, they had taken all the technical knowledge with them. Now the systems were failing, and nobody knew how to fix them. On the planet Kepler Prime, Ambassador Quill was sitting in his office, surrounded by reports of disaster from across the galaxy. The refugee crisis in the Outer Rim had gotten much worse. Without human medical teams, disease was spreading through the camps. Without human food shipments, people were starving. "Sir," said his assistant, bringing him another pile of papers, "the Arcturian delegation is here to see you." The Arcturians came in looking tired and scared. Their leader, Dr. Zim, had bags under his large eyes. Ambassador Quill, he said, our medical research has stopped completely. Without the human data, we can't continue our work on the plague vaccines. What about your own scientists? Quill asked, surely you can continue the research yourselves. We tried, Zim said sadly. But the humans had developed new techniques that we don't understand. They were always willing to teach us, but we never thought to learn everything. We always assumed they would be there to help. This was the problem everywhere. The humans had been so helpful, so willing to share their knowledge, that the other species had become dependent on them. They had stopped developing their own solutions because the humans always had better ones. In the Kithran Empire, war leader Vex was planning an attack on the Zephyrian homeworld. The two species had been enemies for 1,000 years before the humans arrived. Only human mediation had kept them from destroying each other. Now that the humans were gone, the old hatreds were coming back. The Zephyrians are weak, Vex told his generals. Without human protection, they cannot stand against us. We will finish what our ancestors started. The generals roared their approval. They had been waiting for this chance for decades. The humans had always stopped them before, talking about peace and understanding. But the humans were gone now, and there was nobody left to protect their enemies. On the other side of the galaxy, the Zephyrian Council was having the same discussion. The Kitharans will attack soon, said their military leader. We must strike first before they can organize their forces. Both sides were preparing for a war that would kill millions. In the old days, human diplomats would have been flying between both worlds, setting up meetings, arranging truces. But now there were no human diplomats, and both sides were too proud to ask for help. The economic problems were just as bad as the political ones. The great trading companies that had connected the galaxy were mostly human-run. When the humans left, they had taken their cargo ships, their trade routes, and their business connections with them. On the industrial world of Gamma 7, FACTORY owner Krill Voss was watching his business fall apart. We can't get raw materials from the outer systems, he told his workers. The shipping companies are all gone. The ones that are left charge 10 times more than the humans did. His workers were mostly aliens from different species. In the old days, they had worked together smoothly, using human translation programs and human management techniques. Now they couldn't understand each other, and fights were breaking out on the factory floor. Maybe we should try to contact the humans directly, suggested his assistant. Ask them to come back and help us. Krill shook his head. I tried that already. Sent messages to every human world I could find. They all came back with the same response. We are not available for galactic business. The humans were not just refusing to help, they were actively avoiding contact. Human worlds had closed their borders to alien ships. Human colonies had stopped accepting alien visitors. It was as if humanity had built a wall around itself and put up a sign saying, "Go away." In the council chamber on Kepler Station, the remaining species were trying to deal with the crisis. But without human organization, the meetings were chaos. Species that had worked together for centuries were now shouting at each other in languages nobody else could understand. We need to form a committee to study the translation problem, suggested the Telosian representative. We need to form a committee to study the refugee problem, said the Arcturian. We need to form a committee to study the war problem, added. The hegemony delegate. Ambassador Quill listened to all of this with growing despair. The aliens were doing exactly what the humans had always criticized them for, talking about studying problems instead of solving them. Without human pressure to take action, they were falling back into their old habits of endless discussion. And no results. What we need, he said quietly, is to bring the humans back. The chamber fell silent. Everyone knew he was right, but nobody wanted to admit it. They had spent centuries treating humans as junior partners, as useful but not essential. Now they were learning that humans had been the glue holding galactic civilization together. And how do you propose we do that? Asked Vex the Kithran. They won't even answer our messages. Quill had no answer. For the first time in 3 centuries, the galaxy was facing problems that it couldn't solve. and the species that had always solved them before was nowhere to be found. 2 years had passed since humanity left the galaxy. The situation had become desperate. Entire star systems were at war. Trade had almost stopped completely. Millions of refugees were dying in camps that nobody wanted to help. The great galactic civilization that had lasted for 1,000 years was crumbling. Ambassador Quill sat in what remained of the council chamber on Kepler Station. Half the seats were empty now. Many species had withdrawn from the council to focus on their own survival. The beautiful round chamber that had once been a symbol of unity was now a place of despair. "We have to face the truth," Quill said to the few remaining representatives. "We cannot solve these problems without the humans." War leader Vex, whose scales now bore fresh scars from the fighting, slammed his fist on the table. "I will not beg the humans for help. The Kithran Empire has survived for 10,000 years without them." "Your empire is dying," said the Arcturian delegate Dr. Zim. "Half your worlds are in rebellion. Your economy has collapsed." "Your people are starving," Vex growled but said nothing. Everyone knew it was true. The Kithran Empire was falling apart, just like everything else. "The Zephyrian homeworld is under siege," continued Dr. Zim. "The hegemony has lost control of 12 systems. Our own research colonies have been abandoned. The galaxy is returning to the Dark Ages. The Dark Ages. That was what historians called the time before the humans arrived, when the galaxy was divided into warring empires that fought endless battles over resources and territory. The humans had brought peace, cooperation, and progress. Without them, the galaxy was sliding backward into chaos. "What do you suggest?" asked the Telesian representative, her voice tired and defeated. "We swallow our pride," Quill said. "We admit that we were wrong. We ask the humans to come back." "And if they refuse?" asked Vex. "Then we die," Quill replied simply. "Because we cannot save ourselves," the decision was made. For the first time in galactic history, the Council would send an official message of apology to humanity. It took them 3 days to write it, arguing over every word. Finally, they had a simple message: "We were wrong. We need your help. Please come back." The message was sent to Earth, to the human colonies, to every human world they could find. Then they waited. On Earth, President Nathan Blake read the message in the Oval Office. Beside him sat Secretary of State Julie Martinez and Defense Secretary Robert Chun. The message was displayed on a large screen, translated into English by the few human-built translation programs that still worked. "They still don't understand," Blake said, shaking his head. "They think this is about them needing us?" "What do you mean, sir?" Julie asked. Blake stood up and walked to the window. Outside, he could see the bustling city of Washington, but it looked different now. The buildings were taller, the technology more advanced. Humanity had not been idle during their 2 years of isolation. "They think we left because we wanted them to appreciate us," Blake explained. "They think we're punishing them for not listening to us. They don't understand that we didn't leave for them. We left for us." The truth was that humanity had been transformed by their withdrawal from galactic politics. Without the constant drain of mediating alien disputes and solving alien problems, they had focused on their own development. Human technology had advanced by decades in just 2 years. Human society had become more unified, more purposeful. "Sir," said Defense Secretary Chun, "our deep space monitors are showing massive casualties across the galaxy. The Kithran-Zephyrian War alone has killed over 50 million beings." Blake nodded grimly. He had seen the reports. The galaxy was bleeding, and part of him wanted to help. But another part of him, the part that had watched human diplomats being mocked and dismissed for centuries, felt no sympathy at all. "What about the refugees?" Julie asked. "The ones we were trying to help before we left?" "Dead," Blake said quietly. "Most of them. The camps were overrun by fighting 3 months ago. The survivors scattered to other worlds, but nobody wants them." The room fell silent. These were the people that humanity had been trying to save when they walked out of the council. The aliens had preferred to form committees and study the problem, rather than take action. Now those refugees were dead, and the aliens were asking for help. We should send a response, Julie said. Even if it's just to tell them no, Blake considered this. The humans had been silent for 2 years, refusing all contact with the galaxy. But maybe it was time to make their position clear. What should we tell them? Chun asked. Blake thought for a long moment. Tell them the truth, he said finally, that we're not coming back. The response was brief and direct. We are not returning to galactic politics. We wish you well in solving your own problems. When the message reached the council, it caused panic. Ambassador Quill read it aloud to the assembled representatives, his voice shaking. They're not coming back, he said. They're really not coming back. Dr. Zim buried his face in his hands. Then we are doomed. Maybe, said Vex, but his voice had lost its usual arrogance. Or maybe we learned to be what we were before the humans came. What we were before was chaos, Quill reminded him. War, suffering, and death. Then perhaps that is what we deserve, Vex replied. The chamber fell silent. For the first time in 1,000 years, the galaxy was truly alone. The species that had guided them, helped them, and held them together was gone. They had thought the humans would always be there, always willing to try again, always ready to help. They had been wrong. The humans had moved on, and the galaxy was left to face its fate without them, outside the station. The stars continued to shine, but they seemed colder now. The galaxy was vast and empty, and for the first time in centuries, nobody knew what would happen next. 5 years had passed since humanity walked away from the galaxy. The old galactic civilization was gone, replaced by something smaller and harder. The species that survived had learned to stand on their own, but the cost had been terrible. Billions had died in the wars that followed humanity's departure. Captain Lisa Shun stood on the bridge of the exploration ship New Horizon, watching a beautiful blue planet grow larger on the screen. Her ship was far beyond the edge of the old galaxy, in a region of space that no galactic species had ever visited. Here they had found new worlds and new civilizations that had never heard of the Galactic Council. "Captain," said Navigation. "Officer Kevin Walsh, we're receiving a message from the planet below. The Andromedans are asking if we want to meet with their leaders." Lisa smiled. The Andromedans were a peaceful species that had built a small but stable civilization on 3 star systems. They reminded her of what the galaxy might have been like if everyone had worked together instead of fighting all the time. "Tell them." "We would be honored to meet," Lisa replied, "on equal terms." That was the key difference. When humanity had been part of the galactic civilization, they had always been treated as junior partners. Useful, but not truly important. Here, among the new species they had discovered, humanity was treated as equals. Partners, not servants. Back in the Sol system, humanity had transformed itself. The massive space stations around Earth were unlike anything the galaxy had ever built. They used technologies that humanity had developed during their years of isolation, advances that made galactic science look primitive. Admiral Helen Cross, now the head of the human space force, stood in the observation deck of Orbital Station Alpha. Below her, she could see the construction yards where the newest human ships were being built. These vessels were designed for exploration and discovery, not for the endless peacekeeping missions that had consumed humanity's energy for centuries. "Admiral," said her aide, Commander Ryan Torres, "we're getting reports from our deep space monitors. The situation in the galaxy is stabilizing." Helen nodded. She had been watching the reports for months. The survivors of the galactic collapse were finally learning to work together, but it had taken years of suffering to teach them. The Kithran Empire had split into 12 smaller nations. Without their massive military, they had been forced to become traders and farmers instead of warriors. War leader Vex had died in the final battle for the Kithran homeworld, and his people were now led by civilians who preferred negotiation to fighting. The Zephyrian Federation had survived, but barely. Half their worlds had been destroyed in the war, and the survivors had learned to be more careful about making enemies. They had signed peace treaties with their neighbors and focused on rebuilding their damaged civilization. The Arcturians had perhaps done the best of all. Their gentle nature had helped them avoid the worst of the fighting, and they had become mediators between the other species. It was ironic that they had taken over the role that humans had once played, but they were doing it in their own way. "Any attempts to contact us?" Helen asked. "A few. But they're not asking us to come back anymore. Mostly they're just sharing information about their progress." That was another change. The galactic species had stopped begging humanity to return. They had finally accepted that the humans were gone forever and that they had to solve their own problems. On Earth, President Nathan Blake was finishing his second term in office. He stood in the rose garden, looking up at the stars. Somewhere out there, the galaxy was slowly healing from the wounds of the past 5 years. Humanity could have helped speed that healing, but they had chosen a different path. "Do you ever regret it?" asked his wife, standing beside him. "Leaving them to suffer like that?" Blake considered the question. It was one he had asked himself many times. "No," he said finally. "We gave them 300 years of our best efforts. We offered our help, our knowledge, our friendship. They threw it back in our faces. Sometimes you have to let people learn from their own mistakes. Even if it costs millions of lives?" "Even then," Blake said quietly. "We're not responsible for their choices. We never were." It was a hard truth, but it was the truth that had set humanity free. For 3 centuries, they had felt responsible for the galaxy's problems. They had believed that it was their duty to help, to mediate, to sacrifice their own interests for the greater good. But the galaxy had never asked for that sacrifice. They had just expected it. In the outer rim of human space, new colonies were being established on worlds that had never known war. Human explorers were mapping star systems that had never appeared on galactic charts. Human scientists were making discoveries that would have been impossible if they had still been spending their time solving alien problems. Dr. Amy Peterson, now the head of the Human Research Institute, was studying samples from a planet where the rocks themselves were alive. It was the kind of pure science that she had always dreamed of doing, but had never had time for when she was treating alien refugees and fixing alien medical problems. "Dr. Peterson," said her assistant, "we're getting some interesting readings from the life-form scanners. These rock creatures might be sentient." Amy looked up from her microscope with excitement. A new form of life, possibly intelligent, and humanity would be the first to study it. Not as part of some galactic research project, but as independent explorers making their own discoveries. "Set up first contact protocols," she said. "If they're intelligent, we'll treat them as equals from the beginning." That was another lesson humanity had learned. True partnership meant treating others as equals, not as dependents or superiors. The galaxy had never understood that, but humanity had learned it well. Back in the old galaxy, the surviving species were building something new. It was smaller than what had come before, more fragmented, but perhaps more honest. They had learned that they could not depend on others to solve their problems. They had to take responsibility for their own actions. Ambassador Quill, now an old man, sat in his small office on Kepler Station. The Grand Council chamber was empty now, but smaller groups of species still met to discuss trade and cooperation. It was not the grand galactic civilization of the past, but it was theirs. "Sir," said his aide, "we just received a message from the human exploration fleet. They've made contact with a new species in the Andromeda region." Quill smiled sadly. Once, that news would have been shared with the entire galaxy. Human discoveries had always benefited everyone. But those days were over. Humanity had moved on to bigger and better things, leaving the galaxy to find its own way. "Send them our congratulations," Quill said, "and our thanks." "Thanks for what?" "Sir, for teaching us to stand on our own?" The galaxy continued to turn, and both humanity and the aliens were writing new chapters in their stories. They were no longer connected, but perhaps that was for the best. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the chance to prove they can survive without you. Humanity had walked away for good, and in doing so had given both themselves and the galaxy the freedom to become something new.